Hello, my name is Heather Farrington, and my group and I will be presenting on the Consumer Expenditure Survey. The Consumer Expenditure Survey is a Bureau of Labor Statistics household survey. The CE program collects data on expenditures, income, and demographic characteristics of United States consumers. The CE program provides these data in tables, LabStat database, news releases, reports, and public use of microdata files. The program consists of two components, the interview and the diary survey. The interview survey is issued to capture large purchases, such as rent, property, vehicles, etc. Each consumer unit, which is all members in a particular household, is interviewed once per quarter for 4 consecutive quarters. Interviews are designed to capture detailed data on an estimated 60 to 70% of total family expenditures. Estimates of an additional 20 to 25% of total expenditures are obtained for food and other items. The interview survey is conducted with a computer-assisted personally interviewed instrument, or CAPI. Before 2003, the interview survey and the diary survey were conducted with a paper survey form. The diary survey is self-administered, and each consumer unit keeps a diary for 2 one-week periods. This survey is meant to capture small, frequently purchased items to record all purchases. So what is the purpose of this survey? This survey is used for a number of different ways, but the most important is for the Consumer Price Index, which measures inflation. The Consumer Price Index is the price of an average basket of consumer goods and services purchased by households. The CPI is used to provide cost of living adjustments to millions of American workers and retirees. The CPI is used to adjust income and eligibility levels for government programs and government assistance. This survey helps the CPI track changes in prices over time. The Bureau uses the survey results to select new market baskets of goods and services for the CPI every 2 years. The main purpose of this survey is to find out how Americans spend their money. This survey is the only federal government survey that provides information on the complete range of consumer expenditures, as well as their incomes and demographic characteristics. Knowing what goods and services consumers are buying and how much they are spending is critical information in determining the strength of our nation's economy and the direction in which it's moving. Participation in the Consumer Expenditure Survey is completely voluntary. However, when you participate, you are representing thousands of other households like yours. So if you're ever picked to do the survey, you should absolutely do it.
Okay, so now let's move on to the main features of the Consumer Expenditure Survey. There's going to be 4 main ways that the CE publishes data. The first one being publications, which is going to provide information related to survey data, trends, analysis, and methods. We're going to have tables, which contains expenditure and income data for selected demographic and geographic characteristics by consumer unit. There's going to be the public use of microdata, or the PUMD. This is going to provide data on individual respondents anonymously. And then the LabStat database is going to provide time series data that are available through various search tools. And we'll go into these more in detail. First one being publications is going to look familiar to you, hopefully, either from looking online for research or looking through a newspaper. And this is just going to be kind of a way that the CE publishes their data analysis through a way that the majority of the public can understand, using less of numbers and statistics terms and using more terms that the public is used to, so that obviously that everyone can understand the reports and what they're trying to tell the world and kind of highlight in their data. So next are going to be tables. And the tables are going to provide estimates from data by a multitude of variables, which you can see on the right in the example right there before. And hopefully you've seen a table before, but the CE also provides cross tabulations of their data. So if you wanted to kind of get any data based on a gender or a race or both, is kind of what the cross tabulation is going to be, is if you could do analysis on data of gender and race based on all of these variables that they have listed. Okay, so getting into the more like mathematical type of usage from the CE is going to be the public use of microdata. So that's going to just give you kind of like a data file for you to use their data. So if we were in class and we get our data file, it might be coming from this website. We might be working with that in the future, you never know. And they have free public use from the years of 1980 to 2019. So they don't want to give away too much data. They still got to do their research on it. They're all available free to download for everyone. You just have to know how to use SAS or R or some type of code to take their code and then start analyzing it yourself. Okay, so in the last form of data analysis that they're, or the data publication that they're giving us is going to be the LabStat database. And the first way that you're going to be able to look through that data is looking at the exact time series that they have provided for you using the data finder. And that just allows you to search through the time series by characteristics and then create your own charts and tables and export them to Excel and CSV. Where the two other variables, the one screen data search and the multi-screen data search, are going to allow you to look through the time series by households and their characteristics. But then you can then export the data into Excel through like a single screen, so you can change some sort of thing that you would like in the data. You don't just have to take exactly what they give you, where the multi-screen data search would be even more complicated, where you'd be changing multiple things in the data through multiple series of steps, which is going to be difficult to do. But if obviously if you have experience in SAS or R, it would not provide impossible. The only restrictions they have is going to be that the data only spans over a 1 year period. So if you wanted to go from January to June, or say anything January to September, you could only go from January to December using their data that they're releasing to us. There's going to be no variances either or metropolitan statistical data. And that's kind of it for the 4 ways that they get data out to the public. And now we'll move on to some key things we found.
Okay, so the last aspect we're going to talk about are key findings from the survey, right? We know how the survey was conducted, we know why it was conducted, who conducted it, but what were the main takeaways from that survey? That's kind of why this is all coming about. And so I'm going to look at the 2020 survey, and so it was just released in September, on September 9th. So it's very recent data, but this isn't a normal survey because in 2020, a lot of abnormal things happened. So I think it's important to consider that there are many impacts of stay-at-home orders. People weren't going out and shopping or at movies or different entertainment options, as well as transportation. A lot of people used to use public transportation to get to jobs or just decided that they didn't need cars in general. So it's really important to consider that when looking at these findings, because just know that these are representative of atypical times. And then also because the pandemic kind of went into effect in March, instead of data collection being in person, in March, it became online. So that is another thing to consider when looking at these results. Okay, so one or two of the main things that the survey and the survey report talks about is the average annual expenditure. So this is kind of just like what people spend, how much money people spend. And this, you can see I made a graphic here that kind of shows the timeline of average annual expenditures. And you can see that there is a decrease from 2019 to 2020, and also that there's a peak in 2019. So I think it's nice to see it visually. And this is for the last 5 years. And then more importantly, I think, is the consumer price index. And that's kind of one of the main pieces of information that the surveyors wish to gain from the survey is the CPI, and it's kind of a metric of the survey that tells us about inflation and how prices are changing relative to previous prices. And there's this weight, and it's computed with that calculation. And then based on this survey, there was a 1.2% rise in CPI in 2020. So that is another thing to consider. And then just kind of general key findings that I found to be pretty interesting and also pretty much related to the pandemic in many ways. There's a decrease in food spendings, right? So there's a 10.4% decrease in food spendings, and a big part of this was that there was a 32.6% decrease in takeaway food, or food that you would eat out, because we weren't really allowed to go out, or it wasn't as accessible, or it just didn't really make sense. And also many times it can be a lot more expensive. So that was an interesting thing. You also notice that all of these findings were a decrease. So that's another thing to consider. There was a decrease in spendings on retail, a 23.8% decrease. And the main decrease was in boys fashion. It was around 27, and then footwear, which was around 25. But on average, it's about 23.8% decrease in spending on retail, right? You don't need as much, you don't need to do as many things when you're not going out. There's a new school year that started virtually. There's a lot that goes into that. Decrease in entertainment spendings, right? As I was saying earlier, like going to the movies, going to different concerts or things like that just weren't really in the books. So there's a 5.8 decrease in entertainment spendings in general. But one of the aspects of it is admission and fees, and there was a 51.7 decrease in spendings on admission and fees, which aligns with what was happening. And then also there was a decrease in transportation spendings. What kind of stood out to me was that there was a 66.3 decrease in public or other transportation, right? Which totally makes sense, but it is such a drastic change because it shows how much, individuals, workers, students, whoever relied on this transportation, and either they didn't need it or it was no longer applicable. Things changed. So there was an overall 8.5% decrease in transportation spendings. So yeah, that was all based on 2020. And I think it's interesting to see like how things did change and what did decrease, what increased, because it is kind of an anomaly of a year. And I'm curious to see how 2020 shows in the survey. And with that, thank you for watching. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask us, send us a message, talk to us in class, and we'd be very happy to talk to you about it. Thank you so much.